Salvia, a psychoactive plant endemic only to the Mazatec region of the Sierra Madre Mountains, located in Oaxaca, Mexico. Mazatec shamans have a long and continuous tradition of religious use of salvia to facilitate visionary states of consciousness during spiritual healing sessions. The plant species name, divinorum, is said to mean of the seer and refers to its traditional use by learning the cause or identification of an illness. Salvia produces unique effects that are difficult to accurately describe. Some effects that have been reported include uncontrollable laughter, visual alterations or visions, loss of physical coordination, experiencing multiple realities, becoming inanimate objects, a wall, stairs, a couch, etc. Many trips are often extremely disconcerting and frightening, and I've taken 3 horrifying salvia trip reports I got from Error to read for this video. Please be aware that this video is not an endorsement in taking salvia, and this video will provide you more information why taking salvia is a very bad idea. Goodbye Reality, Goodbye Universe, by Hubert Cumberdale. My experience on salvia remains to be incomparable to anything I have ever experienced in my life, and it's still affecting me in a very big and negative way. I have done cannabis and LSD, and at this point I was really interested in trying any drug I could get my hands on. Essentially my mindset was this: hey, I've done LSD, I can do any drug. The only drug I knew that would be stronger than acid was DMT. I knew all drugs created different reactions in different people, but I honestly didn't expect much from salvia, because everyone I knew who took it told me it was like weed, which I thought was harmless enough. As I get to my friend's place, he tells me that he had a crazy dream-like visual, where he was hang gliding over Kansas or something the night before, and it scared him, so he didn't want to try salvia again. But the thought of hang gliding for me was fun, so I ought to try this out. He gives me the pipe, fills it with salvia, lights it for me, and as I inhale, he tells me to breathe in deep and hold. I do as I'm told, and hold the smoke in for at least 15 to 20 seconds. Zeppelin's No Quarter was playing in the background, and I'm ready to have a cool trip. The problem was I had no clue what the potency of the extract was. It really didn't matter in my mind. From what I've heard, most people's smoke is about 5, 10, 20 times potent. But according to my friend, this was 90 times more potent. Needless to say, I had no clue I was in store for a level 5 trip into another dimension. Then, out of nowhere, the second I exhaled, it felt like someone had punched me in the face. The air left my lungs, and I was in the most vulnerable state in my entire life. For some reason, the dark texture of the salvia reminded me of poison, and suddenly I felt like I had just smoked lead. Almost immediately, extremely venomous-looking kaleidoscope patterns filled most of my vision. They were fractal-shaped patterns that covered most of my vision. The only thing that makes sense was my phone on the table, its LED screen shining through the fractal shapes. At that point I didn't even know what a phone was, but for some reason it needed to go. I struggled to breathe, and I could hardly speak. I pointed at my phone and asked my friend to get rid of it. My friend took it and put it in the back room. When he returned, I was a soulless shell. I felt the most intense feeling of deja vu as all sense of self died. That feeling that I had been here before. The idea of taking this drug recreationally seemed as naive, foolish, and immature as anything you could ever imagine. It was like hell. You could have never imagined something so horrifying and evil that it really is ineffable. It's purely impossible to explain, but you're there, and you're definitely experiencing it. There is nothing in this dimension to relate it to. Quite literally, there are no words to explain what I felt other than complete and utter despair and fear. Reality just broke apart and I was left in this fractal void. I couldn't speak. I couldn't feel any part of my body. Ideas broke down to the point where I couldn't think for myself. The images I was seeing were more intense than I could even register, so much so that the entire experience was sort of like sensory overload set to Wembo. I guess my eyes were open and I was just sitting there with a stupid look on my face, but I was in a completely different dimension. My experience was extremely confusing and disorienting. My friend asked me something like, "You tripping?" But it just kept skipping. Suddenly the words lost their meanings, and it became really sloppy sounding. The visuals skipped with it, and it was like everything in the room started to pull apart, and I started to see layers within everything. It was kind of like the cover of Pink Floyd's Ummagumma. But everything was losing its form and gaining new form. The visuals were like flying through an image, like traveling through 2 mirrors facing each other, and just having the pattern of what you're seeing fall into itself, and then reform and repeat. Now, this sounds cool and all, but at this point I had no clue I was under any kind of drug. I didn't know who I was or where I was. I just had this feeling, an extremely overwhelming feeling, that I had caused this disaster. I somehow did something extremely bad that caused the universe to collapse on itself. Now, this was an extremely personal experience, and I felt no connection to any other life forms at all. I was a prisoner in my own mind. I built reality in my own mind. And now I accidentally did something that just brought everything crashing down. It was a devastating solipsist experience. I remember the feeling that within the fractal, quickly evolving matrix was a choir of cartoonesque objects created in the kaleidoscope pattern that were singing to me about the trip. I remember seeing twisted pictures of my friend's face, but nothing was disjunct or cut up like a film. It was all a fluid evolution from one thing to another, but it was so complex and overwhelming that my mind could not comprehend what I was seeing. Everything was alien. Nothing was real or even tangible. I could see it clearly, and yet it somehow was so intense, so bizarre, that it eluded my mind's ability to process it all. All the while, I was listening to Zeppelin's The Ocean, the constant beat and rubber plants, aha, playing in the background. I felt gravity's pull, but it was pulling me sideways. I felt an extremely strong tug downward, and this intensified as my hallucinations became more and more intense. Suddenly, I felt like I couldn't grasp what I was seeing anymore. Not that I could before, but before I felt like I was a slave to the hallucinations. I couldn't think for myself. I couldn't reassure myself that I was on a drug. My mind was spent completely. I felt like a vegetable who couldn't even grasp what he was seeing. Now, my mind was trying to grasp it, but it couldn't. I felt my mind desperately trying to grab at ideas, but it couldn't quite reach. This inability to grasp, coupled with unbearable pins and needles and an extreme downward pull, started to create some sensation of self, but I felt like it was stretched out over the entire field of my vision. I had become the two-dimensional image of this warped and constantly moving alternate dimension. Suddenly it began to fall apart, and I felt like I was free-falling through this picture of my own self. As my field of vision was warped, reassembling, and being pulled apart, I felt my own body falling apart. Now, while this was all happening, I got up, started stumbling across the room, knocked a bunch of things over and then fell back and almost broke my friend's table. Needless to say, all the glass pieces were knocked on the floor, and I was stumbling around like some kind of village drunk in some old Irish novel. Suddenly, as I was fighting for my life, trying to climb out of the layers of reality that were falling around me, I saw my friend's girlfriend's face trying to hold me. Apparently, they were trying to subdue me for some time, but being that I was racing for my life in another dimension, falling to my death through millions of layers of reality, it was a little hard to get through to me. But the second I saw her face, I suddenly realized that I was a human, that I had taken a drug, even that I was a sentient being. All of that went out the window with just a little bit of some good old salvia. My only instinct was to attempt to climb out of this racing, descending, swirling, fractal picture. I was drenched in sweat, to the point where my clothes were dripping. My heart was racing at 1,000 beats per minute, and I could hardly speak as my friends placed me in a chair, asking me what I saw. I told them to give me a minute to regain my composure. Much of the room was knocked over, but I was surprised the whole room wasn't completely destroyed, because I felt like I must have been clawing away at reality, desperately trying to escape from my personal hell. The only way I can honestly describe how I felt was falling down and to the right. The three-dimensional world fell apart and I could only perceive things in a two-dimensional light. My entire perception of reality was annihilated under the drug. The term ego death doesn't even begin to describe what I felt, but there was nothing to be gained from where I was. It was pure insanity to the 10th degree. I had gone in expecting some kind of spiritual experience, or something meaningful that I could come away with, but there was none of that in Salvia land. This was pure, unfiltered madness to a degree I wouldn't wish it on anyone. Right when I came back from Salvia land, my friends let me lie down and watch a movie with them. I was shaking so hard, I just wanted to lay down and relax. They encouraged me to smoke a bowl. I felt like I was midway through an acid trip, and the weed just made it stronger. As we watched the film, it felt like the people on screen were really strange looking, and as we ate some food, I felt myself falling back into the salvia, not in the sense that I saw visuals, But my mind was falling back into that strange place, and I could see in my mind's eye exactly what I hours earlier. The next couple times I smoked weed were similar. Intense flashbacks to Salvia, to the point where it truly disturbed me. Then one day, another friend smoked me out with some hash she smokes daily. Suddenly, I had acid-like thoughts and I had to backtrack, just to realize I was in the room with him. Time to go, I thought, and went back to my car, but it was too strong to drive. I could barely talk due to the cotton mouth. I tried calling a friend but could barely communicate. Since then, I've been getting stronger and stronger reactions to weed. During the first couple of weeks after smoking Salvia, every time I smoked cannabis I would feel the Salvia sensation. Extreme pins and needles and I would feel like I'm being pulled downward. I could play with my depth perception. But sometimes if I stared at something too long, I got the sensation that there was no depth perception. That I was looking at a two-dimensional image that covered my entire field of vision. And then I could see little parts of that image, moving and falling apart. People's faces also seem to be hovering over their face. When I'm stoned around my friend who was my Salvia trip sitter, if I look him directly in the face, the rest of the room creates this kind of tunnel effect that leads straight to his face. Another thing I remember feeling under Salvia, pictures start to dance just like a low-level acid trip. Calling it strange is a more than a colossal understatement. Weed has been taking me to a weird, twisted version of the normal world. Something it never did before. When I'm sober, floaters and white specks really dominate my vision. It gets kind of distracting when I look up at the sky. The reason I'm putting this out there is because the day before yesterday was the worst. I felt anxiety and fear unlike anything I've ever felt. I started to question my own reality. The way objects look on weed began to look extremely disturbing. People started to look disturbingly alien, as if it was the first time I had ever laid eyes on a human before. I felt as if I was realizing something humans aren't supposed to realize. I was beginning to see things working behind the scenes, and it was frightening as hell. It's kind of like that splinter in your mind. That reality isn't what you've always thought it to be, and now that you know the truth, it will haunt you forever. I have trouble even relating to my memories, my past, my identity, who I thought I was and who I wanted to be. For the first time in my life, I feel afraid of something, but I have no idea whatsoever. But it's this feeling, it's deep within me. I think I might have to stop all drugs for good if I ever want to feel normal again. It's the personalization and derealization to a degree that really frightens me. I've never felt so alien. I never knew anyone could feel so alien and alone. I never felt much emotion throughout my life. Never was afraid of much. Never cried over anything. Never was very emotionally attached to anybody or anything. But now I'm scared of something I can't even put into words. And I've broken down a couple times trying to explain it to people. Difficult experiences, right? My biggest fear now is that when I'm not feeling this intense and overwhelming panic, I can't even relate to it in the slightest bit. And all that's on my mind is, I feel fine. Hey, I'm ready to do some more drugs. Reality is a five-spoked wheel, by Volpine. Tonight, my friend sent me a trip report of a Salvia user in his household that sparked a notion that it was the right time. My intention with this trip is to resolve some issues involving my fear of mortality and death, and perhaps the loss of ego I had found in previous Salvia experiences might help. I did my best to prepare the environment. I turned off my computer and the AC because I remembered that distracting noises had been annoying during previous experiences. Expecting to take several hits, I prepared a sizable bowl in my bong. I shut off all the lights in my apartment and I fished out a blindfold to further shut my sense of vision. My cat comes over as I am about to take a hit, hoping she doesn't bug me during the trip. But in actuality I have no awareness whatsoever of her during my trip. I lift up the bong and the lighter. I take a strong, deep hit, and hold, expecting it to be the first of 2 or 3. As I hold my breath and count to 60 in my head, I watch the blinking lights on my cable modem, which I had not shut off, across my apartment. I become conscious that they seem to be receding far into the distance. A thought remembered clearly. This is coming on very quick. I don't think I'm going to have time for a second or third hit. Another thought that followed. as I didn't fix my intentions for this trip in my head as clearly as I normally attempt to do before taking a psychedelic. I exhale and all concrete thought is obliterated. I completely forgot that I had taken anything. Indeed, I forgot so completely that I couldn't even have explained to you that such a class of substances we call drugs, or psychedelics, even existed at all. I set the bong down, and some part of me is aware that my torso is falling back, so that I will lay prone on the bed. Only it seems like an incredibly long fall. A very long fall indeed. I don't know if I actually pulled the blindfold fully on. My time sense was temporarily non-functional. The rest of this paragraph seemed to happen and coexist simultaneously. All statements were true at once. I was a five-pointed wheel. Reality itself was the five-spoked wheel. It was actually not flat in the way a wheel is flat. It had infinite depth. Like each spoke of the wheel was a long shell stretching out into the distance. It was kind of like a paddle wheel on a boat. Only each of the 5 buckets was infinitely long and deep. I was actually a consciousness inside the tumbling object, rotating in its chambers, well aware of all the chambers. They were full of light and beautifully riotous colors. As I tumbled in my colorful bucket through an opening in my chamber, I could sometimes see out into another world, the base of real reality. This world consisted of a grassy green plain, upon which an infinite number of feet were moving, engaged in the act of rolling or rotating the bizarre, wheeled object I was inside. I could even hear the feet striking the ground and feel the vibration from all those marching feet in my body. I became cognizant that my entire life, or what I had perceived it to be, all 27 years, were actually an illusion. They were merely a fancy I had generated while watching the interplay of light, color, and shadow in my bucket. Any minute now I would be tumbled out onto the grass, forever lost from this false, comfortable reality, and loosed into the base reality outside, forever cut off from the illusion of my life I was used to. A profound sense of panic and fear came over me. I didn't want to be cut off from the life I had known. I began to struggle and flail in my chamber, trying to pull myself away from the opening. If I pulled away at just the right moment, I could return away from the base reality to the reality I was familiar with. Some tiny semblances of normality came back, as I again became aware I was lying on my bed with a blindfold on my face, which I removed with great effort. The memory of smoking a hit of very potent salvia slowly, very dimly, struggled back into my mind. As if for reassurance of this fact, I groped for the bong. Somehow, I found it without knocking it over. The panic and fear were fading, but the room kept threatening to continue its maddening rotation. Everything was jiggly and turning. It felt stiflingly hot in my apartment. Still not really sober, I got to my feet and managed to turn the AC back on. I had the fleeting notion, obviously false, that for the last several minutes I hadn't been breathing at all. Realizing I shouldn't be moving much yet, I sat for a few moments before I had enough balance and togetherness to go out onto my deck for fresh air. I sat by the door for a bit, breathing the humid but lightly breezy seeming night air, then went to lean on my balcony and look at the world. I went back inside and pat the cat while sitting on the small bed in my living room. I thought about the notion I heard secondhand from the Tibetan Book of the Dead, which suggests that when you die, entities come whose job it is to dismantle your ego. What makes you the person who you are? If you are ready for them, they appear as angels. But if you struggle, they seem to be demons. That night, they had definitely been demons rather than angels. I decided to go for a walk. I felt trapped inside the 4 walls of my apartment, and even more so inside the boundaries of my skull. I managed to find my shirt, shoes, and my keys. I walked around my apartment complex. Then I decided I needed a shower to cool down and cleanse myself. I walked to the corner store and got some cold iced tea to drink, and a bar of soap since I had run out. I felt more stable and balanced now, well enough grounded, but still distanced from reality. The shower was very refreshing and pretty much cleansed the rest of the weirdness. It brought me more or less back down to earth, leaving the customary feeling of groundedness I usually have after Salvia trips. I feel quite alive and very glad. Also, relieved. This is a good feeling. However, I don't think I've achieved increased acceptance of the impermanence of all things. While I stood on my deck, I had the certainty that I wouldn't want to try Salvia again for a while. However, now I think I'll probably go back sometime soon, with the intention to let go more fully, and try to accept the angels as angels. Imprisoned, Beyond the Scope of My Mind, by Rio Gordon. Never in my wildest ideas could I have conjured an experience as volatile, frightening, out of control, and spatial. I was hanging out with my friend Corey, sharing a couple of beers in Hawaii. Our discussion turned to the use of other medicines, and I revealed some of my experience. He expressed curiosity and a little fear about psilocybin and LSD, telling me he'd never experienced either one. He told me he was afraid of being in another visual world for such a duration of time. The next thing I know, Corey asks me quietly, "Hey bro, ever tried Salvia, diviner sage?" I told him I had smoked it on one occasion, and found the effects to be somewhat lucid and euphoric yet subtle. I had a pleasant visual short-term high period, in which my senses were greatly enhanced. I became aware of the solidity of empty space, and saw vessels of air as if they were glass pockets, and for a brief moment, relaxed on a beach far away, in another world under double moons. As the effect faded, I was left with the thought that my other self had a fish's tail instead of legs. It was a clear visual memory that I hold to this day. When Corey asked me if I'd like to try, I was a little taken aback, but curious. As I said, I felt a sense of import and decided to proceed. I was in the comfort of my own home, had plenty of good music, low lighting, a nice cozy buzz, and was with my new friend. I figured on something like before, but I was dead wrong. Dead wrong. Corey ran to his truck and returned with a small blue glass vial, the kind for containing oils and essences. He let me hold it, and the outside of the glass felt oily. I had the sensation in my teeth that whatever liquid it contained was powerful. Corey told me that this was a salvia extract made in the normal manner of processing herbs, and that it was 60 times more potent. He told me it was definitely powerful and active, but like salvia in general, short-lived. I asked him how we would smoke a liquid. He looked at me strangely and handed the bottle to me, instructing me to look again. I took a closer look and saw that the vial actually contained what looked like innocuous bits of greenish papery substance. Like I explained, I am not a novice, so I prepared my set and setting as best as I could, selecting some mellow roots reggae music and lighting some incense. I next closed my eyes and prayed to the Mother Earth. I smiled at Corey as I lifted the bowl to my lips, lit it and began to inhale. The smoke was not as acrid as I remembered, and I was able to take a great deep draw. It burned readily and the vapors expanded in my chest in the first second or two. As I held in the draw, I experienced a familiar clacking in my ears that sounds like a rattlesnake and a water drum. I have heard it many times when using DMT or LSD. This is all in the first maybe second and a half. The next thing I experienced is Corey telling me to hold it in as long as I can. Longer than a ganja draw. I glance at him, and he seems to be leering at me, like he's waiting for something to happen. I close my eyes and try to breathe the smoke out, but I realize I can hold my breath indefinitely, and don't even need to exhale. As I squeeze my eyes shut, I see something like an engine, made of a Mobius strip or infinity symbols of particles of light in 2 or 3 phases, laying one atop the other, each rotating in different directions. I have just enough time to think to myself, that's pretty, and then I exhale. As I exhale the smoke, time stretches, and I see the vapor peel away from me in a tunnel of rotating color. This all happened, I would guess, within the count of 3. So even though describing it in detail takes effort, there was no substance or time in the experience to really appreciate it. At that point, something terrible happened. Something so disconcerting and frightening that I am beside myself with paranoia and fear that it may occur again without warning. Instantly, without any warning or change in my position, without any preparation whatsoever, my entire being exploded into a fragment of forces. There was no more me, there was no room, no existence, no identity, no island, no planet, no values, no opinions, no power. Just titanic, grinding, terribly painful forces that trembled through my body and tore me to physical pieces. I watched in horror as all of my body fluids splashed onto some surface, and my organs went catapulting away from me. My fingers and toes stretched for miles to various points of infinity, which were overlaid and constructed of rainbow eyes and toothy smiles and distorted wizened faces, all leering at me and teasing me. I was completely upended, in utter annihilating vertigo. with no container to hold my energy, as my being flowed out and into many parallel worlds. I will tell you plainly, this was not a pleasant experience. I was utterly in pain and terrified. I felt abandoned, distant, trapped, kidnapped, raped, let down, and utterly imprisoned forever by this group of leering faces that surrounded my perception. As it continued, there was a terrible rushing of water and a huge pressure in my middle. All of this is very strange, because, while I experienced all this pushing and pulling and distortion, it was mostly in the light realm, for my physical being had ceased to exist. I was so terrified I didn't know what to do. The colors and sensations that surrounded me were gnashing and violent and ripping. My mind was in a terrible clutch, and I was sure I had been kidnapped by some alien race for their experiments, and that they had trapped my mind in a jar, an energy prison, and then desiccated and cut up my mortal remains in front of me. I just knew Corey had been sent by them or the government or some kind of drug assassin or agent to bend me into a place of total submission. I had no power, no senses, no sight, no physical body, no home, no music, no furniture. Absolutely everything about my values, ideas about God, religion, my history had all been violently ended and eliminated in 1 second. I was completely paralyzed and utterly helpless. As I took this all in, I realized that I was surrounded by several voices which were all having great fun at my expense, and not only leering, but teasing me for my discomfort, and then being patronizing and falsely comforting. These voices sounded way distorted and distant, yet clear, and they had the quality of what I can best describe as a lounge singer or radio DJ. I think I make that association because they were attempting to be warm and familiar, even though they were cold and alien. They kept saying, "Hey buddy. How's it going, buddy? How you doing now, buddy? Oh, you stuck, buddy? How'd that happen? Dude. Hey, it's cool, just breathe, buddy." And then they would repeat like that in different keys and tempos in time with the grinding oscillations of light which surrounded me, until I thought I would shriek in agony at them. About that point, I began to have waves of sobbing and grief wash over me, as I realized I had done some utterly stupid thing, and would never live to see my son again. I experienced him becoming a man without his father, and having to live with the stigma that I had mysteriously disappeared, presumed killed. As this thought occurred to me, I realized I had to fight what was happening if I could. This new idea gave me energy, and as I thought it, I screamed out to myself, apparently at the top of my lungs, "I will not accept this," and pushed my hand down hard onto my glass coffee table, snapping the top in two. At that point I screamed out, "Table," and it popped into view, except spinning and upside down. I struggled to wrestle the coffee table off the ceiling, and then screamed out, "Floor." As I did, the floor spun into view, and the pattern in the carpet resolved out of all the energy surrounding me. I was slowly coming into some form. Then and realized I could make a new body from all the cosmic goo which surrounded me. I screamed, arm, then feet, and watched as nimble, strangely thin limbs popped into view. At that point the voices really started mocking me. This is what they said in their harmony of Casey Kasem voices. "Oh, poor baby, baby needs a body. What? I thought you knew, baby. There is no body. There is no you. I am we, remember? You read all about it, baby. Ooh, poor baby, baby needs a hand, baby needs a foot, too. What for poor baby? You're not very good at this, dude. Poor baby." I was enraged at their indifference, determined to walk out of their prison. So I screamed, "Yes, I need my body," and began to stomp away from their leering circle. As I stomped away, each footfall became slightly more solid, and I was treated to a horrific sight. I was lurching along on stubs, dragging my own entrails in my arms, struggling mightily like walking in a pool. As I tried to look around the room, my eye sockets burst into blood, popping out the lenses of my glasses which glittered and fell into the abyss below my feet as the frames melted off my face. At this point, I was popping in and out of my body, and treated to alternate flashes of grinding, hollow fountain, and drained prison of light prisms, or my rotting, broken corpse dissolving, and falling apart like over-steamed meat. The next thing I know, I find myself standing weaving back and forth, breathing with great effort, as tons and tons of filaments of light are streaming off my body like rainbow fur. I can barely see and barely breathe, but I am conscious, somewhat, of a physical room. Next I see Corey sitting in his chair, looking at me slack-jawed. I know that he is the agent who tried to destroy me, and he is in for it. I rush through the sands of resistance, and pick him up bodily out of his chair, pushing him back up against the railing of the porch, and scream at him at the very top of my lungs in an undulating shriek saying, "What the fuck did you give me, fucker? You fucking asshole. What the fuck was it, man?" Over and over like glossolalia, or Tourette's. I began to use one of my newfound arms to sock him in the face and neck over and over, accusing him in a scream of trying to imprison and kill me. Meanwhile, he's fending off my blows and hiding all the bottles because he's afraid I'm going to smash one over his head. Corey then tells me in a wildly distorted, drawn-out etchy voice that resounds around me like timbale drums. "Yo, brah. Just Salvia. Remember, man? You did it before. This is just a little stronger. But just Salvia, man. Just Salvia. Just Salvia." And then his voice fractures like tittering glass, and I fall face down into one of the poles on my porch, smacking my nose hard enough to see stars. I began to scream that if and when the ride ends, I'm going to kill his dumb ass. I grab onto the pole with my arms and legs, and scurry up until I'm hugging it with all my might. As this is going on, the entire universe is flowing by like sand, and I am being tossed on a turbulent sea of yawning titanic opposing forces, being buffeted and slammed by something large, like the house is trying to shake me off. At that point, I pop back out and see my pitiful body clinging to the railing. My face is totally hamburger with exploded bloody eyes and no lips. The back of my head is open from a disgusting impact. I am weeping and have even pissed myself a little. Then suddenly, I'm back in my body again with its luminous skin and colored hair. Then out, then in, and out again, and in. I beg for someone to help me, screaming for anyone at the top of my lungs to please come and help me. I'm being killed. He's got me. Help me. Right about then, Corey comes up and looks at me. He asks me if I'm feeling better. I shake my head and I bite my lip so hard it's fat the next day. I am seconds away from screaming, and I beg him to hug me and take me inside, which he does. Next, I find myself dissolving and becoming solid in waves as I step to the couch. Each step is like molten lead, and I am relieved to sit down. I see a beer in front of me. I grab it greedily, pouring the whole thing down my throat within 5 seconds. I am shaking, mortally frightened, and keep lapsing into pacing, screaming and weeping fits for over 2 hours, stammering and gibbering like a lunatic, and turning on every light in the house. I am full of energy and accusations at Corey, and I see to investigate his import and why he came to get me. For over 3 hours, my vision is so horribly distorted that all solid matter seems to ooze out of the sea of math, from which I have just emerged. I keep going in circles of babbling terror, and stretch my brow and forehead with my fingers, probe at my eyeballs painfully, and tear-deep scratches in my elbows and ankles, as I am trying to pull off the rainbow fluff that coats my body. I guess a little after that, my next-door neighbor came over, armed and ready to beat the shit out of whoever was cutting my legs off, but I don't really recall his visit. Of course, I failed to sleep at all that evening, laying awake and conversing with dead relatives, myself, distant family, and finally after a long restless night, work up the courage to Google what I had just smoked. That was a learning experience. It is now 72 hours later, and I am still barely here. I feel like a ghost, like some important part of me was left missing. I have no values anymore, see no distinction between any energies, other than how they fit into the fountain and drain construct. Driving a car, seeing at night, paranoia, continuous whispering in my head. If it continues for another day or two, I might have had a psychotic break. I remain deeply frightened and deeply impaired from this experience. Food has become innocuous and seemingly unnecessary. All matter has become what it is, loosely bound quantum madness that blinks in and out at will. All of my deepest fears, woes, and ideations about the valueless and unconstrained nature of the universe have been answered. I know what happens when we die. I know how to make a new life. I feel as if I can attract anything. One positive thing to note: this experience seems to have introduced a couple of new qualities to my character. It seems I am having less trouble examining myself for fault, and doing insight and critical thought about how to improve myself for myself. and my musical ability seems strangely enhanced. A new sense of fractioning harmonies and singing has come to me on both the hand drum and the ukulele. I could probably write this account for decades, but I will stop. I just hope no children ever get their hands on this thing, or if they do, that they are star babies already. Enough for now. So, there's 3 stories about the horror of taking salvia. As a psychonaut myself, I do not advise you all to take any psychoactive drugs, especially salvia. I hope you like this video, and if you do, please smash the like button, and leave a comment below which story should I do next. That's about it. Thanks.